The concepts themselves are not the truth. The concepts themselves are not the truth. The truth can only be witnessed. It can't be spoken of. But we don't have any other way to communicate about it, and so we have to use concepts. And so it's important to understand that so that you don't confuse the concepts with the reality of it. The reality of the truth is always available to us, but in order for us to recognize it, we have to first understand that you can't recognize it as a thought process. You can't recognize the truth by thinking about it. Thinking about it is an interpretation of what's happening. It's not what's happening. Right? And that interpretation of what's happening is given by your conditioning. So you have a database in your brain from everything that's ever happened to you, and everything that's happening now gets processed there, right? So I can look at a window, and my brain instantaneously recognizes it as a window, because in the database in my brain, I learned what windows are. So it takes that data, compares it to what's in my brain, and says that's a window, okay? And so that's the way that we function. That's the way we identify what's happening on an ongoing basis from moment to moment. The only problem with that is that what that means, what the implication of that is that you only can see and you can only identify and you can only consider what's real based on what you have learned is real. What you have learned is what it is. And your experience in terms of the data in your brain, if it was compared to everything there is to know, it wouldn't show up. That's how little it is. And so you're attempting to live in a world that has an infinite number of possibilities, a dynamic that has an infinite number of permutations, right? That's unpredictable, that's constantly changing, right? You're attempting to live in a world where that's the case with a pea shooter view, with a little tiny bit of data, right? And you're attempting to get your life to work under those circumstances. And it doesn't take much, if you really consider what I just said, it doesn't take much to understand that's not going to work. That's not going to come anywhere near working. And so what that means is we're not able to successfully use the thinking activity to identify the truth. You can't think the truth. You can't produce a thought that is going to be a replication of what's true, what's real. You can't do it. Therefore, if you're using thinking as a way of trying to achieve happiness, if you're using thinking as a way of being safe, if you're using thinking as a way of being satisfied, if you're using thinking as a way of being peaceful and tranquil, and if you're paying attention, you'll notice it ain't working. It don't work, you know. And so one of the questions you may want to ask yourself is, how long are you going to wait to see how this turns out, you know? If you're 50 years old, are you going to wait until you're 60 or 70 or 80 to see if it turns out when it hasn't turned out for the last 50 years? That's not too smart, right? But most people are playing the game that way. Most people are living their life as it hasn't worked yet, right? But I saw an ad for a new car. And that ad said that if I have this car, I'll be more attractive than I am now. And I'll feel better than I feel now, right? So I get the car, and when I get the car, it kind of does feel good, you know. It kind of feels like, oh, this is all new. Oh, look at all these gadgets, you know, and I can play with the stuff in the car. How fast can it go? How shiny it is. People look at the car, right? Especially if it's an electric car now, right? Or especially it's one of these cars that drives by itself, right, that's available, right? But then after you have the car for a week or 2 weeks, it's like every day you go out and look at it and it starts losing its excitement. You know, it's just a car. And you're on the highway and you're driving down the highway and you look over and you see somebody in a 1955 Chevy, and they're going to get to the same place you're going, and they didn't pay anything like you paid to get there, right? So you start scratching your head. Well, what was I thinking? You know, right? And then you feel this disappointment, you know. The life as it's lived by using thinking, right, and by using emotions as a way of living your life is a disappointment, is it not? Check it out. Look, isn't it true that everything that ever happened in your life ended up being a disappointment? Every relationship you've ever had, everything you've ever possessed, everything you look forward to, it all ended up being, sooner or later, ended up being a disappointment. And if it didn't seem to be a disappointment and you were watching TV, somebody will come on there and tell you it's a disappointment. And you should get your shit together and stop, stop staying with the stuff you have, and understand it's getting the new things that makes you happy. It's getting the new, different, and better. Don't you get it? New, different, and better is the game you have to play in order to be happy, right? But the problem with that is every time you get something that's new, different, and better, it loses its ability to make you happy, right? And then you get something else that's new, different, and better, and that loses its ability. And now you're in this process where how fast can I get things to keep me happy, right? If the car didn't make it, what else? You don't even realize you're doing it. What else? You're on the lookout now. You're watching TV, and they present you with something on TV. They present you on something on TV that's going to make your life easier. It's going to make you happier. If you listen to the language of TV commercials, they're directing it right at the fact that you're disappointed and you're lacking and you're unhappy and you're dissatisfied and you're troubled and you're anxious and you're fearful. They're aiming it right at that. And everything they're saying is, this is the answer, this is the answer, right? Even voting, vote for me, I'll solve your problems. Even though we're so stupid and ignorant that we can't look back and see none of these people ever solved our problems. And the new people come up and say, yeah, but I'm going to solve your problems, vote for me, trust me, do it, this time it'll work. And it never has worked. So you have to get to a point where you start to recognize that to use the thinking activity and to use your emotions as a way of functioning in the world is a disappointment and a failure. That's a huge understanding. That's a very important understanding, because if you get that understanding, you won't continue to do the same patterns over and over again, thinking that someday they'll work. That's called insanity, right? To do the same thing over and over again, thinking someday it's going to work, that's called insanity, right? So if you realize that what you've been doing and how you've been doing it is a failure and it's a disappointment, it's never going to work, that's a big achievement. That's a big accomplishment. Why? Because you'll stop trying that. You'll become open to another possibility. You'll start considering, is there something that I'm missing here? Is there something that I haven't seen? Is there something that is true here, that does work here, right? And when people get to that place, sometimes it's because of a sudden death, sometimes it's because of a sudden diagnosis, sometimes it's just because you end up depressed and you realize the reason you're depressed is because you see your life as being hopeless. What's that mean? It means it's never going to get any better. It's hopeless, right? But in the midst of that depression, it might occur to you, well, wait a minute, maybe it seems hopeless because my understanding of it is wrong. Maybe it seems hopeless because what I think is the case isn't the case, and it ends up being hopeless. So now we're talking about the possibility that if we were to remove the thinking activity and stop using how we feel as a way of determining what to do and as a way of determining how to live, right, we may discover something very powerful. One of my teachers said, the circumstances that occur in our lives never, ever, ever bother us. Now, your mind hearing that will say, that's not true. Circumstances bother me all the time. I got up this morning and the weather bothered me, right? And one thing after another throughout the day. Now, but what the teacher said, the circumstances you and I experience never, ever, ever bother us. What bothers us is what we think about the circumstances, is it not? And the way we think about the circumstances generates emotional experiences, generates reactions to the circumstances, right? So that's what's bothering us. What's bothering us is we don't know the difference between how we think and what we feel and what's happening. We don't know the difference. We collapse that and we think it's the same thing, and then we're miserable, right? But if you were to just imagine that if you take the thinking, right now you can do this. If you take the thinking, and this is what meditation is, if you take the thinking out of the picture and you put the feelings aside and you allow yourself to make contact with what's happening without referencing thinking and without referencing how you feel, it doesn't bother you. It's just what's happening. It's just what's happening. And then you can start to get into the world of a different experience. You can start to get into the world called the truth, right? The truth. So if you're just paying attention and you're not referring to thought and you're not referring to your emotions and you're just being present to what's happening, and you notice when you're doing that, it's tranquil, it's peaceful, it's satisfying, it's not a problem. There's no suffering there. It's easy. It seems like you and life are starting to dance. It seems like you and life are flowing now, right? There's no conflict. There's no resistance. There's no rejection. You know, you're just allowing everything to be as it is, and you're just witnessing that. That's all that's happening, right? That's the possibility. But in order for that possibility to be the experience, in order for that possibility to be the life you're living, you have to get out of the habit of thinking. And when you get out of the habit of thinking, and when you start to look at thinking, not like I'm thinking, but when you start to look at thinking like what's it saying, and where is it getting what's it saying, when you start to do an inquiry, you start to get interested in what's going on here, right? It starts to become very interesting, because then you can start to realize, wait a minute, part of what I think is I think who I am. Part of what I think is I think who I am. And then the thinking I do about who I am has me think I'm this body, and has me think I'm this personality, and has me think there's a story called my life, right? Has me think that I'm separate from you, has me think that in order to get what I want, in order to be happy, I have to get what I want, right? So now I'm subject to TV commercials, right? In order to get what I want, in order to be happy, I have to get what I want. I have to get you to behave the way I want you to behave, right? I have to get my body to behave the way I want it to behave. I have to get the future to be the way I want it to be, right? I have to control what's going on, right? But this whole thing stems from the I thought. It all stems from the idea that the identity that I have, that I use to live my life, is a function of what I think. So the thinking is not only interpreting what's going on in a way that causes suffering, but it's interpreting who you are in a way that's causing suffering. It's interpreting that you're a physical body, and it's interpreting that you're a personality. And one of the things the teachings tell us, right, is that as long as your identity is as a physical body and a personality, happiness cannot occur for you. You can never experience being happy. You can never be satisfied. You can never be at peace. You can never experience tranquility. That's not possible. It's not possible. Well, you may ask, well, how is it not possible? Well, if you're who you think you are, and you think you're a body and you think you're a personality, and then you do a little bit of inquiry into that, like, okay, let me see if it's true, right? All right, so what's coming through these eyes, most people consider what's coming through these eyes to be seen by a person that's back here looking, yes? Yeah. Most people consider what's coming through these eyes is to be seen by a self that's back here behind the eyes seeing, right? But if you do an inquiry, which is what the teachings ask us to do, to inquire, if you do an inquiry and you look and see, okay, is that true? Okay, I'm looking, and what's coming in through my eyes is being seen by and then look. Being seen by and then look. What's there? See, this is getting real now, right? This is getting to the truth. You know, what's looking through your eyes? You say, I'm looking through my eyes. Oh yeah? What you? Where is this you? There's what's seeing is happening, right? Is the seeing being seen by you? Where is this you that's seeing what's being seen? Is it in your brain? If we cut a hole in your skull and look for it anywhere, right? It's nowhere to be found. There's nothing there but brain tissue. There's nothing there but electricity firing. There is no self. This is what the Buddhists are telling us. There's no self. This idea you have about who you are is a dream. It's an imagination. It's not true. It's not real. There is nobody hearing what your ears hear. There's nobody hearing that. There's hearing happening. Right? There's touching, all the senses. There's touching, seeing, hearing, right? But if you do an inquiry and ask, okay, let me look, let me see, you know, where is this me? Where is this I? What you will eventually arrive at, if you're being honest about it and you don't tell yourself a lot of imaginary bullshit, which some people do, if you're really being honest about it, what you'll come up with is there's nothing there. There's nothing back there. There's nothing there. Oh, this is interesting. I've been living my life and depending on living my life as something that doesn't exist. Been living my life and depending on living my life as something that doesn't exist. And I've been living my life with a thought process that's telling me I am that. But other than the thought process telling me I am that, there is no evidence for me existing at all. There's no evidence at all for my existence. Yeah? Not only that, but then if you take it further and you look at what the evidence reveals, the evidence says if you had a head injury and you lost your memory, you wouldn't know who you are. Why wouldn't you know who you are if you actually exist? Well, the reason you wouldn't know who you are is because the only identity you've ever had is the identity that was given to you by thinking. I ask you who you are. If I ask you who you are, what are you going to tell me? You're going to tell me what the voice in your head tells you to tell me, aren't you? You have nothing else to do but to tell me that. And if you tell me that, you're telling me what you think. You're telling me that I have a thought that tells me I'm a body and I'm a personality, and I believe that thought, and I'm living my life as that thought, in spite of the fact that it's not working and I'm miserable. Well, don't you think maybe it's time to take another look and see maybe you're missing something? Maybe you're missing something. Maybe there is a possibility that if you do cultivate your ability to be tranquil and quiet and silent, and you do cultivate your ability to not identify with the thinking activity, and if you do cultivate your ability not to identify with the emotional state that you're in, and you just look at what's happening, if you do that, you may begin to experience freedom. Freedom. Freedom from suffering. The suffering that's caused by the thinking activity. What is the thinking activity doing? It's telling you a lot of the time, it's telling you what's happening is not what's supposed to be happening, isn't it? Isn't it? You get up in the morning, it isn't long, it doesn't take long before something happens, you say, oh, that's not right. It's too hot. It's too hot, you know. Oh, I have a headache. That's not right. That shouldn't be happening, right? Or I called somebody on the phone and the way they were talking, the tone of their voice wasn't right. That's not right. They're wrong, right? Your whole day starts to add up with all of this conflict. Your whole day starts to add up with all this resistance to what's happening. I don't like this. I don't want this. This should be different. This has to change. I have to change it. I don't like it. It doesn't feel good, right? And if you start to do an inquiry, you start to notice certain things about how all this works. You start to notice that your ability to function in the world is determined. It's determined by your identity, isn't it? Your ability to function in the world is determined by your identity, and it's determined by the thinking activity that your identity depends on to function, isn't it? Yeah. And then when you look at that and you start to realize, wait a minute, so this process that I'm dependent on to live my life and be happy and be peaceful and be satisfied is crazy. This thinking activity that I'm depending on is crazy. It's telling me to resist reality. It's telling me to reject reality. Right? It's telling me that everything, the way everything is not the way everything's supposed to be. And so I'm miserable. I'm miserable. And my life is about trying to control this, trying to change this, trying to make it different, right? Not only trying to control this and make this different, but try and control this and make this different too. So all day long, I'm working on being better, improving myself, you know, avoiding being so crazy, right? And trying to control what's happening in the world too. Trying to make that better, trying to control that, you know, trying to make the circumstances give me what I want. You know, I'm dependent on the circumstances to give me what I want. The teachings tell us that if you wake up to the truth and you start to experience your natural state, if you start to experience the way things really are, right, you'll experience that you always have everything you want. You always have everything that you want. What does that mean? It means that when you wake up and you see things as they are, you realize that the way to win the game of life is to stop depending on the circumstances to provide the quality of life that you're after. It won't happen. Don't you think it's time to notice that? Don't you think it's time to notice that no matter what the circumstances have been, no matter how good they have gotten, it never ever lasts. Everything comes and goes. You know, money comes and money goes. Happiness comes, happiness goes. Even enlightenment experiences that people consider to be what they're after. Oh, I want to experience the bliss. I read about it. You know, people who are enlightened, they're like blissful all the time. They never get mad. They're never depressed. They're never afraid of anything. That's what I want. I want the bliss. I want to experience the bliss. Well, if you start to understand the nature of the truth, you start to realize nothing ever stays the same, even the bliss. Even the bliss. If you listen to these awakened beings talking about when they woke up and how Eckhart Tolle, when he woke up, he was experiencing this whole different experience and he couldn't even function. It was so blissful. He just sat on a bench for weeks and just watched everything happening, being amazed at it all the time. And people say, oh, that's what I want. But you're failing to notice something. It didn't last. He's not experiencing that bliss now, right? So no matter how good it gets, no matter how high you go, that's how far down you have to fall, right? That's called bipolar illness, right? No matter how high you go, no matter how manic you get and how late you stay up at night being supercharged, you know, and feeling like you're the king of the world, right? You're going to have to experience the opposite of that, because that's going to come down and go down below where you've ever been in your life. And you'll be so depressed all you want to do is die. That's success. That's called mental illness, right? But that's what we're chasing. We're chasing the highs as if the highs are going to be stable, as if the highs are going to stay that way. That's not the answer. The answer is not chasing circumstances. The answer is not thinking circumstances can ever provide you with what you really want. The answer is cultivating stillness and cultivating being quiet and paying attention, right? So you can realize without the thinking and without the emotional involvement, right? You're experiencing happiness. You're experiencing happiness. Happiness is a function of experiencing the blessing and the grace and the miracle of the fact that you exist. If you stop and look at that, can't you see that that's the case? Happiness is a function of experiencing the fact that you exist as a miracle. The fact that you've been graced with a human life, to experience a human life, right? We don't even know what that is. We don't even know what that is, right? But if you can get clear about it, and if you can be in that experience instead of being in the thinking activity and depending on feeling emotions all the time and watching too much TV and being fed all these things all the time about what you need and what you have to get in order to be happy, if you stop that and you start paying attention to what it's actually true, you start paying attention to your actual natural state, the true nature that you are, the awareness that you are, and you start recognizing and realizing that this awareness is always happy. This awareness is just here. It's not depending on circumstances at all. It's always happy. And if I can stay tuned into that, if I can be that in the world, and not depend on thinking and not depend on how I feel in order to function in the world, then I won't be disappointed anymore. Then my life will start to be a consistent experience of fulfillment. I will be fulfilled. What's that mean? The possibility of my life will be fulfilled. The possibility of my life is to experience being happy and enjoy the opportunity to be alive and experience life and experience the world. We don't get to see that very often because we're fed by the thinking process. We're fed these ideas that are not true about who we are and about what life is. And we follow that and we keep chasing it. We keep trying to get it to work and it never works, right? But since everybody is in agreement that that's reality, and since everybody's in agreement that that's how you get things to work and be happy, we don't think there's an alternative, so we just keep doing it more, different, and better. Harder, right? I'll do more, maybe that'll work. No, maybe I'll do less, maybe that'll work. I'll do something different, maybe that'll work, right? So that's what you keep doing, more, different, and better. If you go into the supermarket and you look at the packages, right, what do they say all the time? New, different, better, improved, right? Why are they saying that? Because they're talking to your mind, and they know your mind is looking for more, different, and better. So they're going to say, this is more, this is different, this is better, this is less is more, just to keep you on track, to keep you in this ongoing, never-ending process of misery. So if you want to come out of the misery, if you want to stop being miserable, you have to begin to entertain the possibility that there is a reality that is available for you to experience, and meditation is a practice that can guide you, that can start to give you a sense of the possibility. You know, you can start to get a sense that when I'm sitting in meditation, and once I've persisted long enough so that the mind settled, and I'm just sitting in meditation and the body is relaxed, I start to notice that there is a awareness here that is already fulfilled. I'm not doing anything. I'm not chasing anything. I'm not trying to get anything. I'm just being here. And the being is inherently satisfying and fulfilling and peaceful and tranquil. And not only that, but the being has access to infinite wisdom. Instead of that very, very limited database that you've been functioning with, now you can relax and be receptive and open yourself up, not by thinking, but just by being available and being open, like Einstein reported. He said, I didn't discover the theory of relativity. He said, I was just relaxing and being receptive and being open and exploring and looking to see what showed up, what downloaded, and the theory of relativity downloaded. So you can have access to infinite wisdom, right, if you stop depending on the very limited thought process that you've been using to live your life. But in order to do that, you have to slow down, you have to relax the physical body, you have to calm the mind, and then you have to take advantage of the teachings. You have to take advantage of the fact that we have at our disposal the wisdom from people who discovered these things over thousands of years. This has never changed. The truth has never changed. That's why it's called the truth. It never changes. Who you are never changes. The way it is never changes. It's dependable. It's stable. It works, right? How could you not want this? How could you not be willing to get this, right? See, but what will happen is you as a personality, right? Because that's where you start this from. You start this from considering yourself to be a physical body and a personality, right? And you as a personality hears this and says, oh, I want some of that. I definitely want that, right? But here's the problem. As a personality, it's unavailable to you. As a personality, you can never, ever, ever, ever have it. And you don't know any other way to function, right? So now what? Now what do I do, right? Well, I start practicing meditation. I start studying the teachings, right? But the teachings tell us that the understanding the teachings, understanding the concepts, and practicing meditation will not get you what this promises. It cannot get you what this promises. Why? Why? Because the obstacle to experiencing the truth is who you're being. And who you're being is not going to stop being what it is because it finds out that it's in the way. It can't. That's like telling yourself to disappear right now. You can't do it, right? So you're not going to be able to realize this possibility. You're not going to be able to realize this truth in the form you're in with the identity you have and with the conditioning you have, right? So then you might say, so why are we even here? Why are we even talking about it, right? Because if you practice these things, if you cultivate silence and you cultivate a peaceful way of being, right, you're getting close. You can't make it go all the way, but you're getting close. And if you maintain that position of being close to the truth will come and close the gap. You can't do it, but the reality of what you are will come to you if you're close enough, consistently enough. Do you follow what I'm saying? This is very important to understand, because if you don't understand this, you'll lose your way, and as a person and a personality, you'll keep trying to do this the way you try and do everything, and it will never work. That's why the teachings are critical, because without the teachings, you'll get lost in the sauce. You'll get lost in the sauce, and you'll become one of the millions of seekers that will be seeking until their last breath and never get anywhere. Right? Why? Because the one that's seeking is the problem. The one that's seeking is the illusion. The one that's seeking is the mistake, right? So you have to develop your ability to see the identity and not be the identity. And when you're seeing the identity, you've got to be seeing it from awareness. And so that begins to open something up. And one of the things that's interesting about this is that how do you stop being the person trying to be the self? How do you stop being the person trying to wake up? How do you stop being the person trying to become enlightened, right? You stop being the person trying to become enlightened by realizing that's already happened. It's already happened. So it's part of your delusion that you think it hasn't happened. It's part of your delusion that you think you have to do something to make it happen when that's not possible. It's already happened. So if you accept that it's already happened, which means you're not doing anything to get that. You're just doing anything to be available. So if that comes to you, so that will come to you, right? But you can't get to that because who you are is what's in the way of being that. Do you follow me? So this is something that if you take these teachings and you start to apply them, you start to look at how things occur for you as you go through your daily life, you'll start to see that unless you practice consistently, unless you can get to a place where you can start to be a witness to what's happening, right? Your life will continue the way it's gone until your last breath. And if that continues to happen and you continue to be identified with the body, your death will be tragic. Your death will be a tragedy. And you'll be terrified when you die because you'll think you're dying, right? But what the teachers tell us, if you don't want to die, then die before you die. If you don't want to die, die before you die. What do they mean by that? The only thing that's going to die is what you thought you were that never existed in the first place. The only thing that can possibly die is what you thought you were that never existed in the first place. If you think about your own death, right? What is the fear that comes up if you think about your own death? The fear that comes up is that you won't be here anymore, isn't it? You'll be gone. You'll disappear. You won't be here anymore, right? Well, the reality of it is, in order to believe that that's the case, you have to ignore the evidence. What evidence? Well, the evidence says that your consciousness and your awareness is not the same as the physical body, doesn't it? Can't you see that awareness is not physical? If it's not physical and that's what you are, then what's going to die? If you really look at the awareness, right? You can't really look at the awareness. I'm just saying that in language, but the awareness is aware of itself. That's what I really mean. If you become aware of awareness and you see the awareness, you'll see that you can't see any beginning to it. It's just here. It just is. You can't see a beginning to it. And if there's no beginning to it, how can there be an end? You know? When the personality hears this, it says, oh, that's unbelievable. That's unbelievable. I can't believe I'm not my physical body. That's how deep the conditioning is, right? But the possibility does exist that if you follow this, if you walk the path, if you learn, if you practice the teachings, right? If you're committed and convinced about the truth and you're persistent about it, right? You can't fail. How can you fail when the truth is already the case? So meditation doesn't produce the freedom. Meditation doesn't produce enlightenment. Meditation doesn't produce self-realization. Meditation doesn't produce anything. All it does is allow you to calm down and relax. And in this relaxed, calm state, you're more available for the truth to come to you. You can't go to it because who you think you are is in the way. But who you think you are can cultivate silence and can cultivate tranquility and practice that, practice experiencing that,